We are one day into 2025, and Nebraska is moving away from what we know it as, at least in how it handles one position group. We explain next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome. It is Thursday, but it is the first show of 2025. Welcome. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. So it's 2025, and it's a good time to sort of reflect, and we could use some news or some recent events to sort of take a look at where Nebraska is at. So they got a commitment from Hardley Gilmore. He's Hardley Gilmore. He's just a little Gilmore.
Okay. All right. I had to look at that name a couple times when I saw it in the news headlines.
I couldn't help it. So they got another transfer portal player, talented kid, ended up playing 7 games last year.
He was hurt the first 5.
Yeah. Ended up playing contributing a little bit last year for Kentucky. Obviously the connection with Daikiel Shorts, who's Nebraska's new wide receiver coach. Nebraska also already has Dane Key in the room as well. And as that has been happening, and as Nebraska has gotten Isaiah Hunter and Gilmore and Dane Key, they've lost guys who were sort of original Matt Rule recruits, Malachi Coleman and Isaiah McMorris and Davon Hall and Jalen Lloyd. And all of those have a certain thing in common as well. And we'll talk about that piece of it as we go on throughout the show too. But Nebraska is making quite the changeover at its wide receiver room. And they're going from players who were young and developmental, sort of projects, maybe, I guess.
All of them in their certain way. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, Malachi Coleman, Jalen Lloyd, all of them. Great athletes, but
now they've got
ready. Yeah, not ready necessarily to do it in a starting role at the Power 4 level. I think all 3 that Nebraska's added would have been starters in the Power 4 next year if they had stayed at their previous schools, Cal and Kentucky. And that's the expectation coming to Nebraska for them and for the Nebraska coaches.
Yeah. So it's interesting how Nebraska has, sort of gone from, and it's this way a little bit to varying degrees at a few different positions. Some of it is based off of necessity, but what Nebraska has lost in the transfer portal, of what they've lost from their graduating class this past year to now what they're building it back up with. And it's not necessarily, but let's talk about the wide receivers. At the wide receiver position, it is not filling those spots that were left by Banks and Nair and the transfers with people who have come through the program and have waited their turn and have developed under the guise of Matt Rule, but have developed at other places and are ready-made products when they get to Nebraska.
Yeah, so I think the question is Nebraska buying into the fill with ready-made players out of the transfer portal model, or is this still a developmental program? And you can be both to a certain degree, depending on the spot. I think wide receiver is the one place where you have seen that changeover. And that may be in part because Nebraska Dana Holgorsen hired his guy as the wide receivers coach. And Daikiel Shorts coming in from the SEC had players he could bring with him and had a certain way that he probably sees this situation and sees what he wants to do at the wide receiver spot. And that is not to wait for Isaiah McMorris and Davon Hall and others to develop into the kind of players that can win in the Big Ten. It's to go get them now. And so I think offensively, Nebraska's kind of stuck in this place where it's like, all right, over here, we're doing this one way. And over here, maybe with the running backs or the offensive line, we're doing it another way. So I wonder, with Holgorsen in charge of this thing and Matt Rule ultimately calling the shots, is Nebraska going to remain a place where at one position group you do it in kind of a developmental process, and at another position group, depending on the preference of the position coach, you can still continue to be that developmental program? Maybe it's as simple as saying offensive line is a place where you have to develop players if you want to be successful.
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely an element of that. Like those are two different positions, and I feel like Nebraska thinks they can develop those offensive linemen, and that's coming along fine. Even though it, I mean, obviously it lacks a couple starters at the moment, and they're going to have to.
It's coming along okay.
Yeah, they're going to have to plug holes with the transfer portal, but you play so many guys at once, and all that stuff. But at wide receiver, some of it is necessity too, right? Like you would have lost Banks either way. Probably not. Nair was not going to be a guy that you could count on or wanted to count on for 2025. And then guy
he went through senior day and looked like he was going to the NFL.
Right.
And now he's jumping around in the portal. Looked for a moment it looked for a moment on Wednesday like he was going to end up at Louisville. According to On3, he signed paperwork and submitted it with Louisville, and then it was removed 30 minutes later. So
how do papers work anymore? I thought papers mean that anyway.
I don't know if it was a DocuSign or something like that. And Nair said, "Excuse me, I got a different NIL offer, so I'm going to pull that back." I don't know. It may or may not have had anything to do with NIL. So, but it's a strange situation because it seemed like Isaiah Nair back in November when he walked on senior day was going to make a run at the NFL this spring, and now perhaps not. Apparently not. So whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Nebraska's receiver room. I do think you're right. Like I think this is and I think there's been an admission by rule across the board. And once again, some of it is necessity. So don't take this as like it's totally black and white, like they're changing their philosophy, because they still want to be a developmental program. But I think one of the things that Rule has realized over the 2 years of being here is, well, I think the urgency is definitely, chipped up of several levels. And so you don't have time to sit around and sort of wait, especially with Dylan Raiola as the quarterback with a position like wide receiver. But I think there has been this sort of
a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been this sort of realization at the wide receiver position. Obviously, you need to get more out of it. And that you can get plug and play players, and it's not necessarily, they can. Wide receiver is one of the positions that can sort of live in its own vacuum, but in its own world a little bit, and it doesn't. The pass catchers are pass catchers. Now, I don't know. I'm speaking in super black and white terms right now. It's not like that, but
some of it's as simple.
For sure.
Some of it's as simple as saying you hired a position coach who had players at his disposal to bring in, and Kentucky's wide receiver group got ripped apart. It's not just Key and Gilmore who have left Kentucky. Basically, all of Kentucky's expected contributors at wide receiver have left. So when Gilmore is sitting there last week after Christmas and he looks around, and he says, "Well, who I was planning to come back, but my position coach is gone. Who am I going to be out here catching the ball with? It's nice that now I'm in a featured role, but like I want to be on a good offense." And Kentucky has taken a hard hit via the transfer portal. So part of it is just that. And then I think it's also then the urgency for Nebraska to get better at that position and the style of this position coach. Like he's going to do things his way, and Holgorsen trusts him to do things his way. And if he says, "All right, I want some new players." Like he had the opportunity to be with Nebraska through the bowl practices, and you saw two players go in. The former Bellevue West receivers both went into the portal after Shorts arrived, and then Lloyd right after the bowl game. So here's who's left for Nebraska on top of the three that the Huskers have brought in since the end of the regular season at wide receiver. You have Ja'Cory Barney, most notably the player who I think is in great shape as far as what's expected of him in 2025 at Nebraska.
Definitely.
And then you have Janiran Bonner coming back as an older player, and a pair of developmental redshirt freshmen in Quinn Clark and Keelan Smith, who have been highly regarded in the program, but we don't necessarily know if that's still the way it is with the new power structure on offense and at wide receiver. They didn't play in the Pinstripe Bowl. So is that the way, what I wouldn't be surprised with any outcome. I wouldn't be by any outcome as it relates to Bonner, Clark, and Smith here over the next few months. So we'll see. Like, they need more than Barney and the 3 guys that they brought in through the portal. Plus, there are 4 true freshmen coming in, most notably Cortez Mills and Isaiah Mosey. So it's in a state of flux. They've got young, they've got old with Daikiel, who's got 1 year. They've got the former Kentucky guys over here. It's going to be fascinating to watch what happens with this position group between now and July.
Well, I think another point to put in there, once again, it's circumstance, right? Look at what that group would have been without the guys that you have now added. You take away Gilmore,
freshman included.
Yeah, he's going into his sophomore year. But I'm talking about, like, you would have been really, really young at that position, and maybe that would be advantageous to you down the road in 2 years when these guys have 2 years of reps underneath their belt. But Nebraska doesn't have 2 years. They had 2 years 2 years ago. They don't have 2 years anymore, right? So I think there's a heightened sense of urgency, and there's this realization. And like we said, at the day that Dylan Raiola committed, like I said, he immediately, when you get him, the clock starts ticking. Like, you have to put people around him to,
no doubt,
to get the most out of him you possibly can. And Nebraska's trying to do that right now.
Yeah, Hunter's young. Hunter's been in college 1 year, along with Gilmore. So Key's the veteran that they brought in, and I think looking at it, he's the wide receiver one. Like, Daikiel is probably the guy. He's like the Jamal Banks, the reliable older voice in the room for 2025. So we'll see. Unless that becomes Ja'Cory Barney, who I think has that kind of confidence and personality. And of course the relationship and the chemistry with Dylan Raiola and this offense too. So again, a really interesting position group to watch as Nebraska just kind of goes bottom line style, all business with the way that it builds its wide receiver room heading into 2025. All right, when we come back, let's talk about the college football playoff quarterfinals and what happened on Wednesday. Both good and bad and very sad in the world of college football. That's next.
But first, let's talk about the FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle all the NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. You can place live bets on the NFL futures. You know what's at stake this weekend in Week 18, and then when the playoffs hit, it's a whole different ballgame. So get in on the action right now with a sweet deal, $5, and you get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. You have plenty of options at your fingertips. It's very, very easy. All you have to do is head to FanDuel.com and join today. And once again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Head to FanDuel.com and get started today. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Welcome back on this Thursday edition, January 2nd of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone in Omaha is with me. Omaha got some snow overnight. I don't know about your part of the metropolitan area, but mine did.
Yeah, I woke up and I looked out the window and I was like, oh, well, look at that. There you go. There's our first snow of the year. We almost went an entire year without getting like traceable snow. I was having a conversation with somebody about this over the weekend. It's
when did we last get snow in 24? Was it really early in the year? Did we not have snow in like February and March?
Apparently, maybe that was wrong. Maybe my sourcing is bad on this, but it
could be right. It could be right. The weather's weird these days, Connor.
I guess so. But I woke
my
up
dog did not like the snow this morning. He looked at me like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm not going out in that.
Interesting.
Every year we have this discussion.
Don't dogs seem to enjoy the snow? Or
I think it just depends on the dog. No, my dog does not. My dog maybe once he's really and as they get older, my dog's 9. He's 8, almost 9. Nope, He's not a fan of the snow.
Hmm.
Not a fan of the cold, really.
He's sick of it by now. He's like, I've seen it enough.
Yes, I think he's like, why does this happen every year? I think it's
He lost
the
his
mindset.
sense of wonder.
Mm-hmm. All right, 3 p.m. today, we have Notre Dame, Georgia. It was postponed on Wednesday because of the act of terror that happened in the French Quarter overnight after New Year's Eve. So sad day in New Orleans for sure. We got Penn State and Texas and Ohio State advancing to the other quarterfinals since we last talked on New Year's Eve. Connor, Penn State in back and forth semi-competitive game against Boise until the end. The Nittany Lions held down Ashton Genty pretty well. He got over 100 yards, but some of that was in kind of mop-up duty. And then we saw Texas and Arizona State play in definitely the game of the college football postseason so far. Not the 30-point Texas win that I pronounced it to be in our prediction show on New Year's Eve. Man, I think the country fell in love with at least that was my sense from my couch here. The country falling in love with the Arizona State Sun Devils and one Cam Skattebo. Like Cam Skattebo is a folk hero after his performance on New Year's Day. No, is he not?
Oh yeah. Like I think people have known the name for a little while now. I guess if you're a casual college football fan, like who's the Skattebo guy at Arizona State? But then we got to see like he does this stuff like, but he took full advantage of his stage. He's staring at the camera and talking to the camera, and he's like, there was the report about how he was throwing up profusely during the game. and like just grinding through it.
Throwing touchdown passes, making big catches while lining up at wide receiver.
Yeah, that guy's all about he's about the show. He's about the bright lights for sure.
I just love how he runs. Like, I mean, he's so powerful, and then you got offensive linemen picking him up and throwing him into the end zone, which was
awesome.
Which was cool. The Sundowns, that's a fun team to watch. That would have been fun to see them advance to the semifinals, but it was not to be. Texas's place kicker was able to get on the plane and go home because the Longhorns pulled it out in overtime after he missed 2 field goals. One that would have won the game, another that likely would have won the game in regulation. So Texas is on to play Ohio State, which looks like the best team in the country because the Buckeyes have awoken and dominated Oregon on Wednesday afternoon in Pasadena in the Rose Bowl. So Ohio State looks like a team of destiny at this point. No?
Yeah, they look really good. I would caution people to say like, okay, this is just what because obviously Ohio State has woken up after their loss to Michigan. They are clearly playing angry and feel as if they have something to prove. They do. And we knew that if they were at their best, they're probably the first or second best team in the country. And now it turns out that they are the first best team in the country because they played at their best, the second best team in the country in Oregon and slapped them around. And they weren't at their best during the Rose Bowl. But Mitch, I have a question for you about the Rose Bowl. How long? So the game was basically over. Oregon tried to make it a little bit, of a game there in the third quarter, but it became clear that it was not going to happen. Did you stick around to watch the sunset behind the San Gabriel Mountains as we went to the fourth quarter? And was that the only reason that you stayed around?
No, I was interested in the game. I knew we were not going to get an evening game. And I just wanted to get the most out of the day that I possibly could. I didn't want my college football viewing on New Year's Day to be over at like 4:00 Central Time or 5:00 Central Time. So I stuck around and I may have seen the mountain sunset, but I was kind of multitasking at that point. Like I went and got some food and I didn't get the enjoyment out of it that I probably have in some years. Like if Keith Jackson's not on the call of that talking about the sunset, it's just not the same to me.
Yeah, it was just Herb Street and his dog again talking about his dog.
Did we get dog talk during the game? I don't.
Oh yeah, we got dog talk. They showed They showed him running out of the tunnel with his dog, during
if you
the
can't
game.
complain, okay. If you can't complain about the SEC getting jobbed, then you're going to have to go to topic number 2, which is the dog.
Yeah, and to be fair, the game didn't help him out. So,
on
they went to the blowout material.
On one hand, Wednesday, New Year's Day, you had Skattebo stealing hearts in his bowl game, and then on the other hand, in the second game, you had Jeremiah Smith, who has now scared the living whatever out of every team on Ohio State's schedule for the next 2 years, knowing that they have to face this guy who would be the number 1 pick right now in the NFL draft, and somehow is going to play college football for the next 2 years.
Yeah, there's 2 guys in college right now who could be wide receivers in the NFL right now, and they're both freshmen.
Mm-hmm. Ryan Williams.
The other one being Ryan Williams at Alabama. Like, those guys are incredible. And then the other game, the New Year's Eve game, like, credit to Boise State for hanging in there. Like, Penn State is really good. Their defense is awesome, and I think their question is, are they going to have Abdul Carter for the semifinal game, who left with an injury? But Aller is like kind of
player
on another level right now. He's really, really good. He elevates them. But shout out to Ashton Genty, who just grinded it out, like, stuck in there. Just they kind of had the Arizona State plan where it looked like it was gonna be bad right out of the gate. And then they just kind of hung in there, made a couple plays, got it to 17-14. So I thought that was a good showing by really both teams. Like, they both accomplished a lot. Obviously, Penn State moves on.
At this moment, the 2 Big Ten teams, I think, look like the 2 best teams in college football, and we'll see what Notre Dame has done nothing to not be included in that group, and we'll see what we see from the Irish, if even the Irish advance, or if Georgia kind of does the wake up act that Ohio State has done here so far in the CFP and realizes its talent, because Gunnar Stockton as a quarterback is certainly capable of taking Georgia to a national championship. This is not like your walk-on story that Georgia's had in some previous years with its QB situation. So one of those teams I think might join the 2. Texas is just kind of like, stumbling around and could wake up at some point too, but I wouldn't be projecting the Longhorns to win the championship at this point. So we could see an all Big Ten championship game.
Well, I think you could make the argument that I don't want to use the playoff as too much of a referendum on what the regular season was, because we've gone down that road a few too many times in the postseason here. But, like, you could make the pretty clear and concise argument that the Big Ten had the 3 best teams in the country this year, with Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State.
Possibly.
So, yeah. And then on Texas, like, I just, quarterback play, it just doesn't quite do it for me. I don't know. He made some plays late, but
sometimes I see Ewers and I'm like, wow, that guy's everything you'd ever want. When he tucked and ran it into the end zone late in that game, and I mean, he's got great athleticism. Like, he looks like an NFL quarterback. He delivers the ball like an NFL quarterback, and the fact that he's held off Arch Manning for this long, speaks to his skill and talent. But it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't all come together, and some of that I think is the pieces around him, and just the fact that Texas isn't maximizing. Like, Texas is the team that we've seen among these top teams in the sport that is the farthest away from, like, it's 100%, being at 100% of its ability. So anyway, let's take a break, come back, get back to Nebraska talk in the final segment. We'll go over some roster math as it stands to enter the year 2025. And we'll also talk about a job that someone with Nebraska ties, deep Nebraska ties, has been hired to perform at a bordering football state. That's coming up next. All right, but before that, I want to tell you about Game Time, because I love going to live sporting events. And I love going to other events too, whether it's music, comedy, theater. I'm going to be at a live event on Saturday in Lincoln as UCLA comes into the Pinnacle Bank Arena. Connor is going to be there. Nothing matches the energy and excitement of live events and the memories that you can create. And now Game Time has made it easier to get tickets to your favorite events with its new feature called Game Time Picks. Try it out, because it filters out the fluff and shows you only the incredible deals that you can get on great seats. One of the best parts of Game Time is that it allows you to see the view from your seat before you buy tickets. I've tried it out. Go check out the super deal. It's got the app's all-in pricing feature that shows you the total cost of the ticket up front. There are no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets today with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time.
All right, welcome back. Final segment here on a Thursday. As like Mitch said, we do have another college football playoff quarterfinal game this afternoon. So looking forward to taking that in, maybe talking about a little bit tomorrow on the show. But
mailbag Friday. Let's do it.
Oh, a mailbag. It's Friday. I just said it was Thursday, which means tomorrow is Friday. My days.
Send in your questions.
Yeah, please send in your questions. Okay, you want to talk roster math here for a couple minutes?
I do, yeah. Right. So I added it up on January 1. Figured that'd be a good time to check in with the roster math, and we will include Hardley Gilmore in this math too. So as of the open of the year, Nebraska had 100 returning players, and this number I arrive at this number by taking all the players on the roster from 2024, removing the players who have gone into the portal, removing the players who walked on senior day. So that leaves you at 100. It's got 20 players that it signed, recruits, freshmen coming in out of high school, and now 12 coming in via the portal. So that puts you at 132. You got to be at 105 by around July. 27 guys still have to have a net loss of 27. So for every player that comes in from the portal, you got to have another one exit the program.
So that number seems big, but
it's
Nebraska
manageable.
I agree. Nebraska has they've always had a bigger roster, and because of this, there's going to be more. But like they have extra things on their roster, extra players on their roster that other schools around college football don't have. So is the math as simple as cutting that piece of it off? In some instances, maybe. They're going to do a full evaluation of sort of what they have and what each player could sort of contribute to the program. But generally, I would probably follow that guideline.
I think what you're asking is it just as simple as cutting the walk-on program?
Right.
I checked it through. I went deeper and looked at that 100 returning players and said, okay, how many of these players would I consider true walk-ons? Players who did not sign a letter of intent coming in out of high school or via the portal, didn't get a scholarship, or they're not on like this NIL equivalency of a scholarship.
Right.
And this is rough because we don't see everything when it comes to that. I came up with about 22. So if you chop those 22, then you're only 5 away from where you need to be in the summer. And you don't want to be at the 105 right now. Also, they're not going to lose all 22 of those guys. There are some players among that. Nebraska still wants to have a walk-on program in 2025 and beyond. Like, it's not going to be all, 3, 4, you would hope 5. There's a couple 5-stars on the team in Raiola and Nwaneri, but you still want to have an opportunity for a player from the state of Nebraska who just isn't a scholarship football player to come in and make an imprint on the program. But by and large, that's what it's going to be. Most of those guys among that rough 22 are not going to have jobs in the Nebraska football program come 6 months from now. And that's a sad thing.
It is. And like you mentioned, you don't have to be at the 105 right now.
Or even in the spring.
You are afforded the opportunity to sort of tell everyone, hang around for a little bit if you want to give this a shot. If you don't, then, great. We're probably, that works itself out, but hang around for a little bit and we'll see how it looks coming up in a couple months. So I think that's kind of the holding pattern that they're approaching it with. You mentioned a lot of those players are Nebraska players who grew up wanting to play for Nebraska. So Dan Jackson, who was a Burke graduate, an Omaha Burke graduate, has coached in the Metro a little bit, and is now bounced around to several stops around the country. Had recently accepted a job as New Mexico's defensive coordinator after being at Idaho for the last year, maybe two. I think it's just
Was it
a year.
Vanderbilt before that? Yeah.
Was it Vanderbilt before that? He has accepted the head coaching job now at South Dakota State. And Dan is, I think, a friend or acquaintance, at least, of both of us. We both know him relatively well. He has been, like, I don't know, famous might be a strong word, but he has recruited Omaha really well throughout many of his stops in college football, including when he was at Northern Illinois and all of those things. So I think this is sort of an important move. And then you add that along with what we were just talking about, roster changes around the country. It's sort of interesting to see how this might go.
Well, he's going to get a lot of players from Nebraska and a lot of players from Omaha, and probably several players from the Nebraska roster right now. Like, look in the portal and start to look at guys who've left and where they're from, and you can start to project who might become Jacks coming up in the months ahead. Kobe Bretz played at Omaha West Side for Paul Lamanji, who was at Omaha Burke with Jackson before Jackson went on his journey into college. That may be a thing that happens. You might see Kobe Bretz going up to South Dakota State. I don't know. This is speculation, but like, that's just an example of a highly visible player who might end up benefiting this top FCS program. And what a time and a place for Dan Jackson. Like, it's perfect timing in the sense that these power programs in the Midwest and all over the country, but especially in the Midwest, where you might find future South Dakota State players have to get down to 105 right as he's coming in to take over this program that has been great in the FCS. If I'm him, I just start looking at rosters around the Metro, looking at rosters at places like Nebraska or Iowa, and saying, okay, who can I get? And it's they're going to come to him because those players are going to go in the portal and they're going to be looking for a place. And some of them aren't going to have spots at a Minnesota or a Florida State or Texas A&M. And South Dakota State is going to be a great option. So it's good for Dan. And, I think this can also benefit Nebraska because I think there will be players who come out of the Metro or who come out of places in the state of Nebraska, and Nebraska just can't offer them. And Nebraska may have offered them in the past, but you're not going to be able to do it with the 105 moving forward. So they can go to South Dakota State. And Dan Jackson's not going to want the South Dakota State program to be a minor league or a feeder program for Nebraska.
Well,
but if you get a player who ascends to like all-American level at the FCS, like we saw with Andrew Marshall at Idaho this year, where Jackson spent the last season, they're going to want a payday. And if they're good enough to play in the Power Four, then Nebraska can be a great spot for them.
Frankly, Mitch, I think that is a recruiting tool for FCS coaches who tell players, they say, come here, play immediately. You're talented. I think you're good enough to play at the FBS level or even the Power 5 level, but you could come here, play, win, develop for a couple years, and then all of a sudden you're a really highly sought after guy to FBS teams or Power 5 teams after you played 1 or 2 years here and produced. Like I think that could be a selling point for FCS coaches as well. So it could be mutually beneficial.
There's no better place, both with its proximity to Lincoln, how it will recruit, the infrastructure that it has, the success that it's had recently in the FCS, and now the head coach that it's got. There is no better place for Nebraska to have a good relationship with than South Dakota State. So this, like you said, this can be a win for Matt Rule.
No doubt about it. Okay. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward. Plenty of developments coming in the next couple weeks. And once again, get your questions in for the mailbag. We will do that tomorrow. We could use your questions. You can email us lockedonneb@gmail.com, tweet at either of us, tweet at lockedonneb, or leave a YouTube comment on this show right here. Appreciate you all today. And as always, appreciate this being your first listen. We have your second listen all covered as well. Craig's got a lot to talk about on the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Check him out there. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.